How many times have you felt that chill and thought, is this a warning or is it just in my head? Well, the line between intuition and paranoia is thinner than it seems. And if you're constantly on alert, but you don't know who to trust anymore, not even yourself, this video might be a game changer. Because understanding whether it's intuition or paranoia changes everything: decisions, relationships, your own destiny. And no, it's not just about feeling, it's about understanding where that feeling comes from. And the answer might be closer than you think. There are times when we get that gut feeling without really knowing why, right? Like when you're about to make an important decision and something inside you screams, "Don't do it." But then what? Is it intuition or just anxiety disguised as wisdom? This inner voice can both save you from trouble and trap you in fears that are not even yours. The thing is, it never comes with a caption explaining whether it's a true signal or a false alarm coming from the dark corners of your mind. Carl Jung believed that intuition is a silent language of the unconscious. It's not logical thinking, doesn't follow step by step, but arrives out of nowhere like a flash. Paranoia is another story. It's born when fear puts fantasy where there's only assumption. It's like looking at a shadow and swearing you saw a monster when it was really just a coat on a chair. The difference is in the tone. Intuition whispers with firmness. Paranoia screams with panic. A good example is when someone feels they should avoid a certain path for no apparent reason and later discovers there was an accident on that route. Seems like magic, but it's not. The brain picks up more than we imagine: sounds, glances, subtle patterns, and puts it all together in a hunch. On the other hand, if someone is stressed out, full of negative thoughts, any noise becomes a threat. So, before following any inner voice, it's worth asking, does this feeling come from a place of calm or fear? And that's where the conversation starts to get even more interesting. Carl Jung saw intuition as a form of knowledge that simply appears without needing proofs or rational explanations. It's as if the mind captured something straight from the air, a kind of wisdom that arrives even before you understand why. While many people try to justify everything with logic, Jung said there's a knowing that escapes logic but isn't any less true because of it. This immediate perception comes like a flash, as if something deep inside says, "Go this way." And even though you don't know where it came from, you feel it makes sense. For him, intuition was one of the four basic gears of the mind: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Each one acts as a lens through which we see the world. Some people decide based on data, others on emotions. Some by what they physically feel, and others by intuition, which often gets it right without warning. An artist, for example, can create an entire work without planning anything, guided only by what they feel they should do. That's intuition in action. It's something that goes beyond words and touches the invisible directly. But this ability isn't a magical gift reserved for a few. We all have it, although many ignore or disbelieve it because they don't know how to name what they feel. In practice, it shows up in everyday life, like when you think of someone and that person calls you seconds later, or when you feel you should go somewhere and there you find something or someone that changes your day. The point here is that if you learn to identify these moments, you can begin to notice how your unconscious speaks, and it speaks more than we imagine. There's a part of our mind that works behind the scenes all the time, even when we think we're in control. It's the unconscious, that silent instance that observes, records, and combines information that completely escapes our conscious perception. And that's exactly where intuition comes from. You know that, "I don't know why, but I feel I should do this"? Well, it's the unconscious saying, "I put everything together, analyzed it, and this is the answer," even if the rational mind doesn't know how it got there. This processing happens as if it were an intelligence center operating in the background. As you live, it captures patterns, micro-expressions, subtle changes in the environment, and even old memories. It's like a puzzle being assembled in the dark, and suddenly an image appears clearly before you, and that's where the self comes in, which Jung described as the center of the psyche. When we're in harmony with this internal center, intuition manifests itself in a much clearer and more reliable way, almost like a compass aligned to true north. But of course, this doesn't happen by chance. For this tuning to exist, you need to be present. Meditating, writing about your own dreams, or even observing patterns that repeat in your life are ways to get closer to the unconscious. Imagine someone who, every time they ignore their instinct, ends up regretting it. That's the unconscious speaking and being ignored. On the other hand, when the person starts to really listen to themselves, the signals become clearer, and that changes everything. The shadow, as Jung called it, is that part of the psyche where we store everything we don't want to see in ourselves. Fears, insecurities, traits we judge unacceptable, all of this gets pushed into a psychological basement. But the curious thing is that the more we try to ignore this part, the more it acts behind our backs. And one of the most common forms of this action is paranoia. When we don't recognize our own fears, they begin to project onto the world, creating ghosts where there was only wind. Imagine someone who constantly distrusts others, always with the feeling that they're going to be deceived. Often this has nothing to do with what's outside, but with what's unresolved inside. Paranoia, in this case, works as a distorted reflection of the shadow, a foggy mirror that transforms internal insecurities into external threats. And the worst part, since it's the unconscious operating, the person has the feeling that it's real. They feel it's true, even when all signs say otherwise. That's why the path of consciousness goes through confronting the shadow, not to fight against it, but to integrate it. When we recognize our own fears, they lose the power to control our perception. This doesn't mean that intuition will disappear, quite the opposite. It means that by cleaning the lens, it begins to work with much more precision. And it's at this point that we begin to understand the difference between true intuition and paranoia, disguised as a warning. There's a psychological mechanism that we all use, even without realizing it: projection. It's when we unwittingly place onto others what's inside of us: fears, judgments, repressed desires. All of this can take shape in the figure of a friend, a boss, a stranger on the street. The mind does this to try to relieve internal tensions, but the effect is like looking at the world through scratched lenses. Suddenly, everything seems threatening, but the threat often comes from within. When projection finds fertile ground in insecurity, paranoia is born. The person starts to create complete stories in their head based on looks, gestures, or even the silence of others. He didn't answer me, he must be angry. She walked right by, I'm sure she was talking about me. But none of this was said. These conclusions arise from one's own imagination, driven by an unresolved past. And the most dangerous thing, the more we feed this projection, the more it seems to gain proof that it's real. Recognizing this pattern takes courage and presence. You need to ask yourself, is this really about the other person, or is it something I need to look at in myself? A good practice is to write down your obsessive thoughts and question, what concrete evidence do I have of this? Often just the act of writing already reveals the exaggeration. Over time, this more honest look brings us closer to clarity, and that's when we begin to distinguish the voice of intuition from that other one, louder, anxious, and more deceptive. Some situations happen with such precision that it would be hard to call them coincidence. It's when you think of someone and minutes later that person appears, or when a book falls from the shelf, open exactly to the page that answers your question. Jung called this synchronicity, external events that connect in a meaningful way with what's happening in our internal world. It's not magic nor superstition, it's the collective unconscious finding a way to manifest through reality. These events, when they catch us by surprise, bring a feeling of alignment. It seems like the universe is whispering, "Pay attention to this." And most of the time, this message comes without mental effort, without worry or fear. It's as if something inside simply knew. Anyone who has experienced synchronicity knows. You can't explain it, but you also can't ignore it. And that's exactly where intuition comes in, like a bridge between the invisible and the visible, between the unconscious and everyday life. But be careful. True synchronicity isn't when the anxious mind tries to force everything to fit. It's not about seeing signs in everything. It's about noticing the moments when the external echoes something deep within us. A good exercise is to keep a synchronicity diary. Write down when something seems too strange to be chance. After a while, you begin to notice patterns, and with them, you develop a more refined eye to differentiate real signals from illusions manufactured by anxiety.
Fear has an impressive ability to distort everything we see. It creates monsters where there are only shadows, makes neutral gestures seem threatening, and transforms uncertainties into absolute truths. When the mind is overwhelmed by anxiety, perception becomes scrambled, like a TV out of tune. At these times, trusting any internal sensation can be a risk. Because real intuition doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention. It whispers amid silence, not chaos. In states of anxiety, the brain activates survival mechanisms. The limbic system springs into action, and the focus becomes danger, even if it doesn't actually exist. It's like being on an emotional battlefield all the time. Everything becomes a threat, a delay in a message, a different look, someone's silence. But see, legitimate intuition isn't born in the middle of this whirlwind. It emerges when we are present, centered, with the mind in a state of listening, not on constant alert. That's why one of the keys to accessing true intuition is cultivating calm. And this can be done with simple practices: conscious breathing, walks in nature, therapeutic writing. Even turning off your phone for a few hours can be a revolutionary act. When the body slows down, the mind clears. And only then can we perceive what is real perception and what is noise generated by fear. Curiously, it's in this space of inner silence that many answers begin to appear effortlessly.
When someone is truly guided by intuition, there's an almost unmistakable feeling of lightness. It's not an exaggerated emotion, nor an uncontrolled euphoria. It's a serene clarity, as if a fog had dissipated. The person feels an internal yes, a kind of quiet certainty that doesn't need to be explained or justified. It's as if all parts of them silently agreed, without having to fight for space. And the most curious thing? This perception almost always comes without effort, as if it had been there all along, waiting to be noticed. A very clear sign that you're connected to intuition is total presence in the moment. There is no fear of the future, no attachment to the past, just a state of openness and trust in the now. This connection also tends to come with an inner peace, even when the choice that emerges requires courage. A simple example: someone who feels they should move to a new city, even without a strong, logical reason. When it's intuition, the decision brings calm. When it's paranoia, it comes with tension, doubt, and rush. The difference lies in the quality of the feeling that accompanies the insight. Another powerful indicator is the absence of a need to control the outcome. The person doesn't try to force things to happen in a specific way. They act with intention, yes, but with detachment. And this is rare to see because most of us are used to planning, controlling, anticipating. Intuition, however, invites trust, not in a naive way, but deeply. If you want to experience this, start by observing small decisions: what to eat, which way to go, who to call. Notice when something resonates with lightness. Intuition begins in the details. Paranoia has a very specific way of manifesting. It steals your peace. When someone is taken over by paranoid thoughts, it's as if a constant agitation takes over the body. The mind begins to spin in circles, always returning to the same point, like a scratched needle on a record. Everything becomes a reason for suspicion. Someone's silence, a stranger's look, even a strange dream can turn into a red alert. And the most difficult part? The feeling that something is wrong seems very real. One of the most evident signs that you're diving into paranoia is the obsessive repetition of the same thoughts. The mind can't relax and the person looks for signs, confirmations, proofs, even if there's nothing concrete. This type of mental pattern usually comes with intense anxiety. It's like being on the edge of a danger that never materializes. The person feels it in their body, tension in the shoulders, short breathing, difficulty sleeping. There is no clarity. There's just a state of permanent vigilance, as if the world were about to collapse. Another strong indicator is the construction of stories based on assumptions. The person interprets others' attitudes based on their own insecurities, not on facts. A practical example: a message that took time to arrive becomes a sign of rejection. The colleague who didn't smile today is already being considered an enemy, and thus forms an internal labyrinth difficult to exit. The cruelest part? The person believes they're being intuitive. That's why understanding these differences is essential to not getting lost in your own thoughts. And the key to this lies in learning to train your perception. Developing a reliable intuition isn't something that happens overnight. It's like cultivating an intimate relationship with a silent part of yourself, a part that already knows, even before the mind understands. And for that, the first step is to reduce internal noise. Techniques such as meditation, for example, don't just serve to relax, but to clear the channel between the conscious mind and the unconscious. 5 minutes a day in silence already makes a difference. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be consistent. Practice here is more important than ritual. Another powerful tool is intuitive writing. Open a notebook, put a question at the top of the page, and let the pen flow without censorship, without judging what comes out, without trying to write beautifully. Just let it come. Often, in this spontaneous flow, deep ideas and perceptions emerge. Another complementary practice is observing your own dreams. Jung considered dreams messages from the unconscious, and keeping a dream journal can reveal patterns, symbols, and even unexpected answers. A recurring dream, a strange scenario, a figure that always appears. All of this might contain clues. Finally, self-knowledge is the fertile soil where intuition grows. The more a person knows themselves, the more they notice the filters that distort their perception, and can separate what comes from fear from what comes from the self. This can be done with psychotherapy, study groups, reading authors like Jung, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, or Joseph Campbell. It can also be done with simple but deep questions, such as, what I'm feeling now is fear, or is it truth? Developing this internal listening is like tuning an instrument. It requires attention, patience, and presence. And the more in tune it is, the clearer the music that comes from within will be. Finding the balance point between reason and intuition is like walking on a narrow bridge between two worlds, one made of logic, analysis, and facts, the other of subtle perceptions, deep feelings, and impressions that can't be explained, only felt. True wisdom is born when these two sides become allies, not enemies. Reason gives us structure, while intuition points direction. It's like driving a car. The rational mind is the steering wheel, but intuition is the GPS. When the two work together, the journey flows with fewer detours. Often, though, we confuse intuition with impulsivity and reason with coldness. And this causes an internal conflict that's difficult to manage. The person feels something strong, but tries to justify it with 1,000 arguments and ends up ignoring an important signal. Or they follow a blind intuition without reflecting, and later suffer the consequences. The secret lies in integration, listening to intuition honestly, but letting reason help analyze the context. A practical example: If you get that feeling that something is strange in a situation or person, don't dismiss it. But also investigate, observe, ask. That's acting with discernment. Jung called this integration individuation, the process of uniting the opposites within oneself to form a more whole being. And when this happens, the inner voice stops being a fight between logic and emotion and becomes a harmonious conversation. The person feels more clarity when making decisions, less guilt when trusting themselves, more freedom to make mistakes and learn. Life then doesn't become a rigid script to be followed, nor a chaotic improvisation, but rather a dance between control and surrender. And it's at this point that everything begins to align more naturally. Now tell me, after everything you've heard, how will it be the next time that inner voice calls to you? Will you be able to stop, breathe, and feel if it's real intuition or just an echo of your shadow? Because in the end, the question isn't just what am I feeling, but rather, where is this coming from? And if you start observing yourself more carefully, you'll realize that you have much more power over your choices than you imagine. Your intuition is already there, but are you really listening? What important decisions have you avoided making for fear of being wrong? And how many times have you sabotaged yourself by believing too much in baseless assumptions? Think about it. Write in the comments what made the most sense to you in this video. Or share an experience that marked you. Your story might help someone who's going through something similar right now. And if you felt this content helped you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who needs to hear this today. Oh, and of course, if you want to continue learning how to develop your intuition, access your unconscious with awareness, and live with more inner clarity, subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell. Here we go deep, but always with our feet on the ground. And if you want to take the next step in this journey, click on the video that's here in the card. It will expand even more on what we talked about today. I'll see you there.